Oh, good. I thought I had a bad link for a second.
Yeah, no. It might actually be a kind of a quiet one today. A bunch of the other maintainers all had a conflict for today, but we'll see.
Ah,
Um, Either way, happy New Year, Jay.
yeah. Happy New Year, Mike. Yeah.
But yeah,
No. Looking forward to some good things this year. We've been doing a lot of crosstalk within the other working groups and other SIGs, especially with you know S2C2F, Salsa,
mhm.
Fresca, and I think we had some talk or some chatter about guac in there too. And I know Kasari does both Fresca and guac, so there's a lot of
Yeah,
chatter going on with that as well, man. I mean, we've been doing a lot of crosstalk amongst it. So I'm I'm very interested in what we can come up with this year.
yeah.
Yeah, moving that ball forward.
Well, yeah. We definitely be down to have some conversations now that the holiday's over and we're getting back to a more normal schedule.
Yep. Yep. Yeah. Yeah. And I'm sorry for me. I'm in the gym right now. This is
No,
so
no.
anytime before 9 a.m. you'll probably find me in the gym, especially early hours. And these
Yeah,
calls are early, so I got to put the headphones on and do these calls while I'm doing my workout.
yeah. All right. Looks like folks are getting on. And let me see here with the Fresca meeting notes. Let me bring these up. What is this? Okay. One second. Feel free to put your name and attendance in the list here. And it's going to be probably a quick agenda for today. Whoops. Let me just. Okay, so a couple of things from, let me actually double check here. Source. Okay, so yeah, I already spoke about the open source summit here. Yep. Okay, cool. So one of the things I wanted to talk about was the pipeline framework document, which I know I showed off a little bit last time, and that document is over here. Give me 1 second, and I plan to just sort of show off a little bit of how it works. Probably going to be a little quiet for today, just because a few other folks have a conflict. But just good pipeline library. So some folks might have already seen this, but one of the things that we've been, or at least I've been looking at, and was one of the things that we wanted to kind of push forward a lot more with in this year, is the Fresca pipeline framework. And one of the things that we wanted to do was we wanted to kind of make the use of Fresca as easy as possible. So the idea here is, because Fresca uses stuff like Tecton and Tecton chains and Spiffy Spire and all sorts of other stuff behind the scenes, we don't want this to be just a customizable, you could just use it however you want. We wanted this to just essentially be an example of, a way that you could run stuff securely. It's not intended to be the only way, it's just intended to be a way to run this stuff securely. And, the idea here being that, we can provide some flexibility, but the bigger thing here is we want to just sort of show how easy it can be if you follow, let's say, these rules or whatever, and how you can, let's say, generate salsa, ingest S2C2F, etc. So one of the things here, is if I kind of go through a little bit of what kind of the end goal here for some of the stuff we're looking at for Fresca, right, is we are looking at ways to kind of make things simple so that for the end user, they just have something simple, like a very simple basic YAML with their project, their repository, and the build type, something like that. And if I go to the to show you what this sort of thing looks like, based on what the document kind of outlined. If I run this, right, is this config here generates all of this actual configuration, which is how Fresca is orchestrated. And so you can see here, it generates, a pipeline account, cluster role bindings, yada, yada. But the idea here, right, is it's pulling data from here, putting it all in, yada, yada. Now, like, obviously this sort of thing can be done with, Python or Go or really, various templating libraries. But what's nice here is by doing it in Q, we get, it's like a very mostly straightforward language, which allows us to do stuff like this, right? Where this is the project, but the project is constrained by what the team allows. So the team allows, the Go and build packs pipelines. So if I were to put in something like a Python pipeline and run this, well, it doesn't match the constraints anymore. Sorry, this is not a pipeline that's allowed by our, by your team. And the same thing goes with, if the team adds in or removes things in here, it would automatically cascade down to all the things that, fall under that team. And so let me put this back here. And so these constraints, right, there's lots of different things here, right? The constraints can say, hey, the name of the team is Team Z. So if I go up here and you can see here that, like, the naming scheme for the images include this sort of thing. The build types can be constrained by, let's say, the individual team. Additional policies can be implemented by, the team here, right, where, they want to have, they want to make sure that all, images with the prefix baz or whatever use the my3 key or what, my key 3, right? Stuff like that. And then, an individual department can further kind of constrain stuff where stuff that's in the department can further constrain what is happening even in a team. So if I were to go and take this build type, for example, and say, actually, only Go is allowed, even though the team says, hey, I allow build packs, the department says, no, you are falling under my department. We only allow Go. And so that's kind of, and as you can start to see here, right, is these sorts of constraints make it very easy for us to implement rules that are hitting all the salsa requirements, all various NIST requirements, S2C2F, all of those things. All of that can be sort of encoded in stuff like the queue, so that you can kind of say, great, I get to go and, let's say, build my pipeline, but I still need to follow all the right rules, and the rules can be encoded as sort of constraints here. And then an org, right? An org might have some additional information. So an org says like, hey, the image that you generate should have a naming scheme that looks like, and I know this is, some of this is just syntax, but basically this is saying it should be the org dash department dash team dash project name, right? And so as long as you define all that, you get that sort of thing there. And then here we have a set of allowed builds, right? And so if somebody were to, let's say, remove one of these builds completely, this would also, further constrain what happens over down here. And what's kind of cool here is that an individual org can kind of come in with their own pipelines and what have you. And then, an org can come in with their own policies. And so there's flexibility in the configuration, but the idea should be for folks who are just like, hey, I just have a build packs thing, and this is just a standard Fresca thing. Great. I just get to call it like this, and I just get a pipeline with all of this configuration, but all that configuration is generated on your behalf. Before moving on, does anybody have any questions?
Yeah, I got a question. That naming convention part, and I, I mean, I won't call that smart. That's extremely important, right? And
Yep.
one of the things you find in a lot of organizations, especially with referencing how they bring in open source components, right? Whether it be through whether it be through proper policy and procedural channels, or whether they bring them in, outside out of band, right? They'll bring them in, and then the naming conventions, right? They can have the same component, same package across a few different teams, but their naming conventions will all be different. Is there a way that that they can use this with existing pipelines, existing packages, to get them all on the same sheet of music?
So potentially. So one of the things we're exploring is building some tooling around this to help, let's say, let's say, a Jenkins file, let's say, and convert it into Q. Sorry, well, I should say convert it into Fresca, but like, through something like Q. There's some stuff there. The thing that's actually kind of nice, and once again, I'm not an expert in Q, so it's probably worthwhile maybe having somebody from the Q community to come in and give a little bit of a demo on some of this. But one of the cool things you can do with Q is, like, if I just have, let me show you this real quickly. Do I have it somewhere in here? It might be under old. Yeah, let's see. Well, one of the things I can actually I could show even here with this thing, right, is I can do Q import foo.yaml. Sorry, not Q. What was it again? Yeah, it's gonna be import. Right, and this will automatically generate Q out of it. It can take YAML and just automatically generate that. And so if there are things that are, let's say, written in something like a YAML or a JSON, Q can automatically ingest it. And there's a bunch of stuff that you can do, which I'm not going to show off here right now, but what you can do is you can actually, if you have, let's say, 100 files that look like this, you can actually have, in fact, actually, let me just do this. Give me 1 second here. There is ways in Q to actually get it to get it to actually interpret like what types you're using and stuff like that, which then allows you, if I think it's called Q trim. Whoops. Sorry, something just happened here with my, there we go. So if I do Q trim, okay, it looks like there's nothing really changed here, but you can actually have it look at a bunch of different, let me see, maybe Q trim this one. Yeah, so yeah, just make sure. Yeah, so you could have this, and I don't have it set up right now to do this, but you could actually have it come in, look at, let's say 100 or 150, different YAML files, and have it automatically pull out like schemas on it. So you can pull out things akin to like a naming scheme automatically. Like it won't be perfect, but it might say like, if you prefix everything with, foo, it'll know like, oh, all strings that have, name are prefixed with foo, and it'll create a regular expression for you to do some of those things.
Nice.
Yeah, but the idea here is to sort of, try and make it simple. And one of the other things that we're looking to do with Fresca is we are looking to become a salsa rebuilder. So salsa has that sort of concept of, hey, if enough information is generated in a salsa build provenance, you should be able to go into that provenance, pull out all the actual steps, and then be able to rerun them somewhere else. And one of the things that we're looking to do is actually take all that, convert it then back into something like a Fresca pipeline.
Nice.
But yeah, that it's possible. It's going to probably require quite a bit of tooling, but I think that sort of thing is one of the things we're trying to do with Fresca there.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so stuff like that, it'll take some time. I mean, if you can start hammering away, little by little, I mean, you're not going to get it perfect in the beginning, but over time, you can get it where minor adjustments can be made. And then, of course, as you begin to as things begin to get a little bit more similar in terms of nomenclature, then things will be able, the app itself or whatever the mechanisms are, be able to do things little by little to get them all in sync. So I mean, that's an over time thing, but good.
Yeah. That's definitely something we want to kind of get involved in. And so then, yeah, there's a couple other things here just to kind of show you some of the stuff we're trying to do. So that build packs thing, right? We have a build packs sort of, you can imagine this is the catalog, and a lot of this sort of stuff is we're copying, some, like we can vendor certain things directly from Tecton, but we can also sort of generate our own sort of tasks in here. And actually, this is not a great example. Let me go to the Go one, I believe, which is a bit of a better, yeah, here we go. This one's a bit of a better example here, but here's, let's say, a Go pipeline, and you have all the stuff here, but you can still sort of, all of this sort of stuff gets, the inputs to that build or those builds happen here, right? And it lets it, like, it makes it very easy for us as the folks in Fresca to say, hey, look, we're not just purely Tecton. We're not just purely Tecton chains and all these other things. We're constraints on top of it. And we're trying to be an opinionated set of constraints to provide an example of, hey, this is how you could do this securely. It's not the only way, but it is a way. And that helps with two things. One is we hope to be an example that people can then follow and say, oh, great, we should do something similar for what we're trying to do. And then also for folks who maybe are just like, yeah, I just need something that just sort of works. I don't have, as somebody who's been on that side of like naming schemes and has been on the side of like, a lot of times naming schemes are determined by some massive Excel spreadsheet, hey, this is a sort of thing that just helps you kind of get what you need and encode those constraints as code, as opposed to needing to kind of say, well, we manually check that everybody has the right naming scheme, or we manually check that everybody has the right policy. The thing that's really nice about this is that you can define policy at the org level, and at the project level, it's enforced on it, right? It's not like, and on the department, it's enforced on it, and on the team, it's enforced on it. So like different teams can say like, hey, I'm a Go only team. And then a different team can say, hey, I'm a build packs only team, and be able to still do that as long as your, department or your org sort of encodes that, those constraints for you.
Right. And that's extremely important. Yeah, at the org level is extremely important, because you do not see that today across the board. Everybody's doing it manually, and things are falling short. So that's extremely important.
Yeah, and we do know that there's some folks who are working on like what they're calling like governance as code platforms and those sorts of things. And we're hoping that Fresca can be something that can plug into those things at for the, for stuff like the build. And with the idea of making it really, really simple to encode all that stuff. And so just to kind of show you here a little bit, so we have, these tasks. And once again, these tasks are like this task here is essentially something that was just taken from the Fresca. Oh, sorry, is this the Fresca? Sorry, this is catalog. No, I want to, it's under package catalog. Yeah, so like, for example, one of the things we can do is we can start to define tasks, which, in Tecton are just some YAML. We can actually say, hey, here is what we're calling a Fresca task. And a Fresca task has these constraints on them. And right now we don't really have any constraints yet, but these are things that we can start to do where we can say, hey, a Fresca task must have, for example, all images referred to in the Fresca task must be pinned by digest. Like we don't allow non-pinning by digest. Like even though other, Tecton itself and other CI tools are going to allow those sort of things, we're going to say, no, Fresca, because we're saying it's only secure and we want to make sure that it could be the secure example, it's only that. So this is also one of the things that we can do here is there's a thing in Q called like functional, like it's almost like a functional pattern. So Q doesn't exactly have functions in it because it's just it's a non-Turing complete language. But what you can do is you can sort of do stuff like this where you can say, hey, I have some inputs and then this is the output. And so I can put in, like, if I want to have a policy that takes in a name of the policy, an image glob, like, something that I want to enforce on that policy and a key that I want to enforce on that policy. So this case, hey, I expect, I want to check in Fresca that anything that matches this image is signed by this key. Great, here is just a generator for that. And so I can use it as many times as I want. Different teams can use it however they want and so on. So there's a lot of stuff here as well that we're planning to build, which can help us generate stuff like Tecton tasks, Keyverno policies, various cluster policies and so on. Cool. And then one of the things we can do here is we can encode also the pipelines themselves as consisting of certain defaults, right? So in this case, this sort of thing is saying, before you run the build, Fresca consists of the Fresca clone task followed by any other task, right? Cool. And then the build task consists of some number of build tasks. And once again, this is very, very early on. We can constrain it in various different ways. And then in post-build tasks, there's some level of post-build tasks. But you can imagine there might be something like a Fresca task. You could have something like a Fresca, publish task or whatever. And that's something that, your last task must be a published task. And so this sort of helps us say that, no, you don't just get to like say what happens when. We help determine that. And, the other thing that's nice about this as well is that these constraints can also be, can also come into the org. So an individual org can further constrain those things to say, hey, we want to replace this task with that task, and so on. And we can do stuff like, once again, various inputs. And so, once again, these inputs are pretty much saying, I require a pipeline name. It's a string. I require pre-build tasks, which is of this type, the baseline pre-build tasks. And so what this is just saying is a pre-build task must start with the Fresca clone task and any other tasks after it. So even if somebody were to come in with a pipeline and try and override this and say, actually, I don't want to use a clone task, I want to use something else, the pipeline is no longer a valid pipeline, it wouldn't run. And so these sorts of things, like, even though, it sounds complicated right now, it's mostly complicated for the maintainers of Fresca. for most end users, it's going to be very simple for folks to say, great, I just have a very simple pipeline. Great, you just get to just define it like this. You have something a little bit more complicated. Great, you get to start to do stuff that's more akin to this, where you have a few lines of queue or whatever. But all of that sort of stuff allows you to kind of, come in and do that sort of stuff. And then there's a couple of things here, right? So, we would allow people to generate their own custom tasks. But once again, those custom tasks can be defined in various different ways. So for example, here, this pulls all the defaults from the Fresca task. Oh, sorry, not that one. Where did I put that? The Fresca. Oh, why did I just hold on a second here. The Fresca pipeline. Oh, there we go. Sorry. So it pulls in the defaults from here and just modifies a couple of things, right? In this case, pretty much I'm just saying, hey, for the Fresca build task, I'm replacing the default build task with the build packs task. And I'm also adding in an additional, that's pretty much it. And so anyway, that's kind of where I'm at now. Still looking for feedback on the design document. This code right now, because it's just some POC code. It's under my it's just under whoops, that's not the right one. Yeah, there we go. It's under my my personal thing here. If folks want to, I'll add this to the agenda here. And so feel free to take a look in there. I noticed a few folks, a few of the other maintainers joined a bit late. I guess their meeting ended. I'm curious, did folks for Remy and Brendan, did you get to see this much at all, or did you just join?
Jumped in about 5-10 minutes ago.
Yeah, I just saw the end of the task queue.
Okay. I'll briefly go over it again, unless other folks have other agenda items. And okay, I'll go over briefly because I know some of you have seen this before. But pretty much, the idea, the end goal here for most folks, for something that we're trying to do right with Fresca, is do something like this, where this very simple YAML can become all of the actual Kubernetes config that's required to actually operate Fresca. And, you could see here, actually, let me type this into less. You can see here, this project name is used throughout over here and yada, yada. And, the repository right, you can see here, some of this stuff is automatically discovered. And so one of the things, and then this sort of automatically generates the queue for that. But the idea here is that this project's configuration is constrained by a team's configuration. So if I were to very quickly just sort of say build packs is not allowed, whoops, this would no longer work because, hold on, you're telling me you're using build packs, but that's not a valid build type there. And then, a team here can also define their own policies. They can define anything that doesn't break any constraints from the layer above. And so in the layer above, a department can define certain things. In this case, we're also defining throughout here just different pieces of the naming scheme. So the team is like Team Z, the department is department Y, the org is org X. And then the org says, hey, the naming scheme for all of our image outputs is org-department-team-project. And you can see that as, let me just rerun this again. You can see here that naming scheme is then automatically used by the different stuff. And because, you know, all of this stuff is pushed in to, it's pushed into the actual pipelines themselves and the pipeline definitions that we have inside of like this. Once again, it's not a full-fledged catalog yet, but, you know, the stuff that's in this catalog, hey, it automatically, you know, passes in all of that information. And so the idea here is your configuration should be more or less just like the runtime configuration. If folks are familiar with TerraGrunt or TerraSpace or some of those things, like they have this idea of, you know, you have your Terraform modules and those live in a set of folders, but then you have your live configuration, which then calls that stuff. And so the idea here is we would have a catalog as well as a library of helpers that could help you generate pipelines, help you generate tasks, have a catalog of existing tasks and pipelines. But then the idea is there would be a bunch of like things in here that would help define constraints at the sort of baseline level, saying like, hey, a Fresca task must look like this. A Fresca pipeline must look like this. And so in this case, like, once again, this is just purely for like the POC, but a Fresca pipeline must start with the official Fresca clone task and some number of other tasks. It must include, you know, a set of build tasks. It must include a set of post-build tasks. And then as long as you follow the rules here, it'll automatically flow in. And once again, this is just purely POC. There's still a lot of stuff that has to be done here, but that's kind of the idea. And then all of this can then get loaded in. The other thing that's kind of nice about this is we also get the ability to sort of test it all out via, you know, here where if I'm not going to go into it right now, but if the test didn't, you know, this would error out if any of these things didn't generate a valid queue and stuff like that. Arnaud?
Yes, I mean, thanks for doing this. I mean, this is great. I had a question about the organization, department, team, kind of organization. This hierarchy, is that fixed into the framework? No, you can do whatever you want, or do you have N levels? How does that work out? Because I can imagine, depending on, you know, the actual organization people are going to find themselves in, they may have different type of structure.
Yep, it can be any way folks want. Like we would probably ourselves provide maybe a couple of examples, like a simple example of a hierarchy and another example of a hierarchy. And that kind of leads into, you know, one of the things that we would like to do once this gets a little bit more well-baked is probably creating something like a Fresca CLI tool that would help you generate that hierarchy depending on how you want to have it set up. But yeah, like the way that queue works is pretty much if you have stuff that exists under a package like Fresca, anything that exists in a further nested you know, directory is just something that is a further constrained thing. So you could just have, like, for example, you could just have an org and a project level, and that's it. Yeah. You could have org, department, sub-department, sub-department, team, you know, you could do it any way you want there.
All right. Sounds good.
Everything under that example. Sorry.
Good, man.
I was going to say everything under that example directory is an example. So that's how the organization decided to set up for themselves. They could set up whatever directory structure they wanted.
All right, that makes sense. I mean, I have no knowledge of Q, so I show my ignorance here. Sorry.
Yeah, no problem.
Otherwise, I wanted to just react to one, since I have the microphone, I'll abuse it a little bit more. I wanted to react to what you said earlier about the rebuild aspect. You know, I find this very interesting to try to set up the framework so that you could use it to rebuild something and basically verify that, what is claimed is actually correct. I think, overall, for obvious reason, we have to start somewhere. So we are mostly been focusing on producing things, provenance and so on. But at some point, we've got to worry about, okay, how do I actually verify all this stuff? Because we can produce all the attestations in the world and whatnot. If there's no way to verify, well, it doesn't have much value unless you're willing to blindly trust, whoever gives you the attestations and so on. So I do find this idea of being able to have a framework that kind of can be recursively used in a way, right? It sounds very interesting.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So I got two thoughts I'm thinking of. One is thinking of it from a penetration tester standpoint, which is what's stopping a user from defining their own task run, running their own task, in addition to everything else. Because Q itself is going to say, hey, make sure the whole Fresco structure is right, but then you've also got the same primitives there to define anything else.
So on that front, I believe the idea would probably be two things. One is this doesn't like you still should do something like using Flux or Argo or whatever as a way of like deploying new builds, right? Because at the end of the day, if you're giving folks access to the Kubernetes cluster to change this thing, they're going to be able to do it either way. And that includes like, even if we were to do something, I think like create, a set of controllers or operators or whatever to, let's say, manage this, we'd still have the same sort of problem because you're like, whoever you're giving admin access is going to be able to start poking around and changing things. So the idea here would be using something like a CLI tool so you don't shoot yourself in the foot when, like, it'll help you kind of structure stuff and say, hey, this probably will or won't work when you're about to actually deploy it. And then obviously we probably want to do something like where we can, using, because I know we in the make file and whatever, and some of us are using, whether it's Minikube or Colima with K3S, try and make it as simple as possible for folks to say, yeah, this will be a valid pipeline that should run when I try to push it. But yeah, the idea here is this should not be seen as the security thing. It's more from the perspective of it helps you kind of lay out the policy and yada yada, but you'd still want to have some set of checks at another level. And then the other thing that we're looking at here is with something like, let's say, the CLI tool, I can imagine like there's certain things here of, maybe the org level constraints are a library that gets imported in at some way, right? There's some way to sort of pull it in as so that the end user doesn't need to, like, the end user doesn't even get access to change that code. Stuff like code owners and yada yada would also help out here. But that's one of the things that I think, like when we get to that point, I think we're gonna try and figure out how to do that sort of thing. But yeah, to your point, there's a lot here that would not prevent somebody who had access from just deploying just a random Tecton task or changing the queue to, hey, if I'm, I'm not a, if I'm just an engineer, I can just go in and say, I'm going to create the, malicious build and then just do whatever I want.
Yeah. So not so much a developer interface, more as maybe like a back end to a DSL. So there'd be some other front end on top of this is populating it.
Yes, or the idea would be that like, you can change, like you as the end user would be able to change this sort of stuff, but this sort of stuff maybe has a code owners owned by your team and like the team lead, the department is owned by a department lead, the org is owned by, and so on. And so even if you do try to come in and modify like the org, it'll just show up as a PR and somebody at that level will have to approve it. Obviously that comes with its own, set of constraints as well. But the other thing too, I think is if we do have something like a Fresca CLI at some point, we could encode a lot of best practices right there in the code. And we can provide like linting rules and yada yada to say, hey, it looks like you deleted all the, all the normal constraints. This is now going to be undefined behavior or something like that.
The other thing I was thinking about was how someone might be able to use a tool like this to output something other than Tecton. So if
Yes.
they wanted to swap out the entire back end and still use the same interface that we're defining here to output that.
So yes, that's something I know we've discussed, and I think one of the big questions is always like, who's going to maintain that piece of it? But yeah, I think there's nothing here to prevent folks from doing that. In fact, I know one of the things we had when we were earlier on, when we were looking at stuff like the Keyverno piece, right, is we could have whoops, that's actually a test for but for the Keyverno piece, where's I putting this? Like something like this, you know, it wouldn't be very difficult to sort of like similar to like an interface, right? Say you define a policy interface and you just have like a Keyverno implementer and you have a OPA implementer and so on. Certain things are going to be a little bit more or less difficult just based on like each individual CI tool is kind of doing their own thing, right? So certain CI tools are going to call that like their delineation between different things. And so there's something here I think that's worthwhile for us to think through, which is just, I don't want to get unless we want to, and I'm willing to do it. It's just, I don't know if we want to get into our own sort of, here is a Fresca definition of what a pipeline is. And we encode all of that. And then you could have the mappings back into Tecton, into who knows, whatever else, you know, other CI tools, even something like GitHub Actions could be, you know, something we could do. There are certain things that I think, you know, Fresca does, right? Because we're implemented Spiffy Spire, because we've done all this other stuff. There's a few things here, right, where we have, what was I going to say? There's a few things here where we have the ability to constrain certain things because, you know, as you know, Brandon, like we have Vault, we have Spire, we have all those things where certain other CI tools that maybe are being used as a backend don't have those things. But with that said, I think just separately from Fresca, I think Q, other than some of its quirks and the fact that it's not the easiest thing to learn, beyond that, I think it's like an absolutely fantastic like technology agnostic, you know, configuration language, because it doesn't have all the same issues that something like templating has, right? Where, you know, if I were to use Helm, and once again, I know Helm is more of just running a service, is not really for operating the service mostly, but, you know, if I was using Helm, a lot of these things would be, you know, templated variables, and you would have a templated for loop, and it becomes this kind of big mess. Whereas in something like Q, it becomes like, it is pretty easy here where in the verify images, like this just sort of means I can have one or more of these things. You know, I can define these things similar to, it looks very similar to JSON with just some sugar, you know, syntactic sugar around it. But I do think that this sort of thing, I hope more folks just begin to use it. I know that SigStore is using it for their own internal sort of configuration stuff for internal policies and whatnot. But yeah, I really like it. Cool. Any other questions? There's no other questions. I think there's like two things wanted to ask the community. One was, hey, it seems like folks are liking this sort of general flow. Probably makes sense to push forward with, you know, designing out a v0.1 of this flow. I'd be interested to know if there's anybody who wants to kind of who has the time, who wants to sort of sit down and help out. I know that one of the things we're trying to also do in the new year is there's two things we want to do. One is we want to get more maintainers. One of the things I think we're looking to do as part of that maintainership is move the main Fresca repo into the actual BuildSec, from BuildSec org into the SSF, OpenSSF org. The reason why it was there was just from some practical, things, but there's a few things there. And the other thing we're looking to kind of try and do in the new year is try and attract more folks to the community meeting, because I know that a few people had, a few folks have reached out to me saying, oh, I didn't realize there was a community meeting for Fresca. And, I read about it, but that's about it. And so I'm going to be trying to work with the OpenSSF on maybe, what we can do to sort of help drive a little bit more community engagement. And then the last thing is more of maybe for next time going through like a roadmap for 2023. Or for the next 6 months or something like that, for things we want to kind of get done with Fresca. I know that the governing board of the OpenSSF has recently voted on, I think, a new direction for 2023. And one of the pieces of the new direction is they do want to have a few more demonstrative examples of things, not just purely, for example, there's S2C2F, there's Salsa, there's a bunch of these other OpenSSF standards like scorecards and yada yada, but I think they're also looking to try and do more things like, hey, is there like a good open source security scanning tool that we can, show, hey, here's an example of how to use it and push that out. But anyway, I think we're trying to also get in line with the supply chain integrity working group and some of the other things that are kind of happening there. So anyway, I spoke a lot. Interested to hear folks' thoughts on, that on potential roadmap items. Does that seem reasonable to people? Let me stop sharing.
Yeah, absolutely. And as a matter of fact, I have, I'm not sure if you guys can hear me. I have an ongoing conversation on how, and I've been doing this across several working groups, getting more folks inside of these community meetings and SIGs, especially on the technical end, to start putting pen to paper. I'm not a highly technical person. I'm not a keyboard person. So while I do a lot of my best thinking and I understand the technology in front of me, putting pen to paper, that's not where I'm at now. So I'm actually working on trying to get more individuals who are those brilliant minds with those fast fingers to come aboard and start actually putting pen to paper on helping us build a lot of these outstanding things we're doing across the OpenSSF. So this resonates with me. If you wouldn't mind, please, if you can, send me an email with the exact need, and I'll be happy to see if I can reach out and try to pull folks in, saying this is what we need. Can you pull them in? You know what I mean? I'm working on stuff like that right now. So anything you could give me that I can take back and pull folks in, that would be a big help to me.
Sure. Yeah, I'll definitely shoot you an email. Cool. Yeah, definitely. The more, the merrier, and we'd love to have more input and feedback. I know some things are gonna be figured out in the coming weeks. I know I've been talking to a few of the folks in the governing board and the TAC, and I know they're still sort of finalizing some details on a few different items. I know there's been a term like Sterling toolchain being thrown around. I don't know how real or not real that is, but I know at least the idea there sounds pretty interesting in the least. But yeah, cool. Any other thoughts? Otherwise, I think for next week, or not next week, but the next time, so in 2 weeks, probably want to kind of have a little bit of a chat over like some roadmap items, like things that we want to push out for this year. One of the things being this pipeline framework, another thing probably being the CLI, another thing probably being a way to package up Fresca internally at the startup. That we've been sort of playing around with a few things. We do plan to eventually open source it. We're just kind of playing around with a few ideas on packaging there. But yeah, does that sound good to everybody? Cool. Any other questions, thoughts, anything else anybody want to bring up? Otherwise, we can end like 9 minutes early. Cool. Well, I'll see everybody in 2 weeks.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye, guys.
Thank you. Bye-bye.